As you're no doubt very clear on by now, Final Cut Pro 10 is not a traditional track-based editing program. So what happens when you very quickly want to access or play or export a version of your sequence without music, or with just certain dialogue, or without the titles? In track-based editing programs, you just disable the tracks that you don't want, and then voila, you have what you need. But in this program, that's not possible. You can really only work with your primary storyline, your secondary storyline, and your connected clips, each which may contain any number of elements. So let's talk about what we can do in Final Cut Pro in using roles to define our clip categories. So I'm going to go into my 7.5 keyword collection, and I'm first actually going to load my roles end project so that I can show you where we're headed, which can hopefully give you a sense of why roles can be useful. So this is the type of project that we're used to looking at. We have our interview clips on the primary storyline. We have our connected clips with our B-roll. We have music. But if I open up my timeline index, and then I'm going to go over to roles, and I'm going to expand a couple of these categories, take a look at how much detail we can actually see about each of these clips. So I'm going to expand this. And as you can see, I have lots of different categories of dialogue over here. And if we look in the timeline, here they all are. I have Casey dialogue, Christian, Jim, Joe, Mike, Sean. Everybody is broken out into separate roles. And then over here in the timeline index, I'm able to select specific roles, and you can see that they likewise become selected in the timeline. So if I wanted to affect the audio of a certain interview subject in a certain way, I could very easily isolate that and make that change. I can also enable and disable certain roles. So if I wanted to turn off certain roles, I could do that. And you can notice that they gray out, and now they're not going to play in my timeline. So a lot of control. I'm able to really break things down to a very specific level here in the Final Cut timeline. I'm going to collapse that back up, and I want to talk about how we can get here. So I'm going to go to Roles Begin, and let's start at the beginning here. So roles are just like categories of video and audio, and by default, Final Cut contains 5, and I'll show you those now. If I go to the Modify menu and Edit Roles, here are the 5 default categories: the video roles of title and video, and the audio roles of dialogue, effects, and music. And actually, every single one of the clips in the Final Cut environment automatically contains one of these main default roles. And to check the role assignment of any given clip, all you have to do is just right-click on the clip and then go to Assign Video Role or Audio Role, and then wherever my check mark is what that role is categorized as by default. Now, there's actually a little bit of an easier way to quickly check what your roles are, and that is, again, by opening up your timeline index and then going to roles, and then you can see that my roles are color categorized. So right now, my video and my audio are all blue, my music is green, my titles, which I do have some titles in this program, are purple. So at a glance, you can kind of tell what each of your clips is based on the color. You can, of course, come in and change this color if you like. If I go to Edit Roles, and let's change something fairly drastic, I'll go to Dialogue and click on the color picker here, and I'll change it to red, for example, and apply. You can see that it changes here in the timeline index. It also changes here in the timeline, and I'll change that back to blue. Now let's talk about when you actually assign these roles. You actually have the option of pre-assigning your roles upon import. And let me remind you of that option. I'm just going to right-click and choose Import Media. And then down here, audio roles, I can either assign them automatically, where Final Cut is going to analyze the metadata and decide what role it should be, or you can force a role on import. So that is an option. You can also assign roles at the browser level. So if you see that a role is incorrectly categorized, for example, this music clip, if I right-click and choose Assign Audio Roles, you can see that right now it's assigned as dialogue. So I can change that to music. The color changes accordingly, and then whenever I edit this into a project from this point on, it's going to be correctly categorized as music. And then finally, you can also assign roles right here in the project, which is frankly what you'll likely need to do most of the time. If you want to change or add a role, you just select a clip and then right-click and choose Assign Video Role or Audio Role. Again, you can see that I've already added a lot of these roles, but by default, again, you just get dialogue, effects, and music. If you would like to add roles, like I have here, you just go to Edit Roles, and you can either add an entire audio or video role by clicking on this plus sign and then naming it, and I'm just going to delete that now. Or you can add a sub-role, which is what I've done with each of my interview subjects. So you can come in and then hover, and you can see that it says Add Sub-role. So I would just click on Add Sub-role, and then I would type in the name of a new sub-role. For our purposes, I'm just going to type in Demo so that it'll show up in the list, and I'll say Apply. And then you would just right-click on the clip, Assign Audio Roles, and then there's the one that I just added, so I could add that one. But I'll go ahead and take that away for now. Now, there is an easy way to add a role to all of the clips at the same time, and that is by using your timeline index as well. Remember, if you go to Clips and then just use the search field, I can easily pull up all of one person's interview clips. So say, for example, I wanted to select all of Mike's interview clips. I'm just going to type in Mike, and I'll just select this and press Command A, and here they all are selected in the timeline. And I have a few B-roll clips, which I don't want to include, so I'll just Command-click to deselect those. And then again, with all of my Mike interview clips selected, I can right-click, Assign Audio Roles, and then again, once I have added the sub-role, I can just check Mike dialogue, and then they're all added. So again, I have gone through and done this to every single one of my clips in this Roles End project, which I'll reload right now. I'm going to come back to Roles, and I'm going to choose to show my sub-roles so that we can look again at all of this important information in my timeline where everything's broken out. Let's talk again about all the ways that you can use this. Again, you can select certain roles here in the timeline index, and they subsequently become selected here in the timeline. So if I wanted to come into my audio effects and add a certain EQ effect to all of these, it'd be very easy to apply them all at once. I won't do that for now, though. I can also deselect or turn off certain roles, which can be very useful in isolating exactly the audio that I want. I can also rearrange these. So if I want to make sure that my principal interview subjects, for example, Mike and Christian, are up here at the top, you can see that now Mike's at the top, then Christian, and then everything's in alphabetical order. And let's say that I want to bring Sean up as well. So we'll bring that up. And everything that I do here in the timeline index is likewise done here in the timeline. Not only that, but whatever role organization you set up in the timeline index is going to be how Final Cut actually edits new material down into the timeline. So everything is going to fall into place. I also have a couple of tools here. I have my focus tool, so that if I click on any certain role's focus knob, then that will be the one that you see in the timeline, and everything else will be collapsed into these bars. And I'll just unfocus that and then focus my dialogue, and you can see that the opposite happens. So if you have a lot of different audio roles in your timeline, you can focus the appropriate assets. For now, I'm going to collapse my sub-roles so that everything kind of shrinks back together here. And I just want to mention this first button, which we haven't talked about yet, and this is show or collapse this lane in the timeline. This isn't going to give you quite as much detail as showing your sub-roles, but as you can see, this breaks apart each audio element from the associated video, whether it be from an interview clip or from B-roll. So you can see each and every audio element broken out into these lanes as Final Cut calls them. And I'll go ahead and collapse those as well. So that's a little intro into roles. For now, just know that it's mostly nice to be able to set up your categories so that you can very easily enable or disable all of one type of asset at a time, and even a very specific sub-role of each category of asset at a time. But just know that in Chapter 12 of this course, we'll expand on this further and talk about how assigning roles in this way can help in the exporting process when you hand your edit off for a professional sound mix.